Okay, so let's start. Let's start with Gopi Deepa. We can start.
So a very good morning to all. My name is Jayewardenepura, Faculty Dera Natung Government College, Itanagar, and I'm your moderator for today. So we are here today for a special lecture on historical development of anthropology in China, in continuation to the international lecture series jointly organized by Dera Natung Government College, Itanagar, Arunachal Pradesh, India, Mrinalini Datta, Mahavidyapith, Bharathi, West Bengal, India, and University of Sri Jayewardenepura, Nigogoda, Sri Lanka. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome the guest speaker and all the participants. Thank you all for joining us today. So to begin with, I would like to request Dr. Taraka Ananda to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Professor Chen, dear distinguished guest, and my dear colleagues, let me welcome all of you to today's platform. And I'm very much honored to welcome our guest speaker for today's lecture, Professor Chen, Professor and Director, Center for Social and Economic Behavior Studies, Yunnan University of Finance and Economics, China. We are warmly welcoming you to our lecture series, sir. And I'm pleasure to welcome three principals from an advisor of the three institutes, which are Department of Anthropology, Dera Natung Government College, India, and Department of Anthropology, University of Sri Jayewardenepura, Sri Lanka, the Department of Anthropology, Mrinalini Datta, Mahavidyapith, India. And also I would like to welcome Dr. Suman Chakrabarti, Head Department of Anthropology, MDM, and all the he as the coordinator of this lecture series, and joint conveners, Dr. Ratan Tayeng, Head of Anthropology, DNGC, and Dr. Sushmita Sen Chowdhury, Department of Anthropology, MDM, and members, Dr. Pushpalata Tagga, Department of Anthropology, MDM, Ms. Gopi Reba, Department of Anthropology, DNGC, Ms. Tanushree Poli, Department of Anthropology, MDM, Ms. Saswati Roy, Department of Anthropology, MDM, and all the participants, distinguished guests, and my dear colleagues, you all are welcome to today's lecture series. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, may I briefly introduce to you our guest speaker, Professor Chen Gang. He is the Chair Professor and Director of Center for Social and Economic Behavior Studies at Yunnan University of Finance and Economics in China. He post-graduated with MA Anthropology from Iowa State University in USA. He received a PhD in Anthropology from the Ohio State University in USA. He worked as a lecturer in Zhangjiaotong University during 1994 to 1997 and was a teaching assistant in Department of Anthropology at the Ohio State University during 1998 to 2000, and also a postdoctorate research fellow in Department of Human Nutrition at the Ohio State University during 2000 to 2004. He also worked as a visiting professor in Department of Sociology and Anthropology of Ohio University during 2004 to 2006. His chief research interests are in the areas of health and culture development anthropology and cultural tourism, globalization, and culture change. He has received a number of research grants from research foundations in China and USA. He has published over 80 academic papers and books both in English and Chinese. He is now the chief editor of International Journal of Business Anthropology and the representative of Chinese Anthropological Society at the World Council of Anthropological Association. So please give a warm welcome to Professor Chen Gang. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. It's my turn to start, or?
Yes, you can start.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Sushmita.
Thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Suman, for inviting me to present historical development of Chinese anthropology in your lecture series. I think you have done a great job to organize such a lecture series or platform. And I think it's a great idea even to invite native speakers to talk about anthropology in their own countries. So you have done such a wonderful job. So today I'm going to talk about historical development of anthropology in China. From first slide you can see, from the outline you can see, basically there are 4 parts of my presentation. Now I'm going to move to part 1. Part 1 is basically kind of introduction of myself, and you can see all those pictures. It's pretty much cover my life from my undergraduate degree or undergraduate study all the way to current jobs. So from the top, you can see Lanka University. That's where I got my BA degree. Then later I moved to Jayewardenepura University to teach English. Can you hear me? The connection is not so.
Absolutely, Professor Chen. Absolutely, you can carry on. No problem.
Okay, but this shows connection. Well, anyway, I can say I teach my undergraduate degree. The major was English language and culture. So I taught English at that university for about 7 years. Then I moved to USA to study anthropology. MA, as introduced, MA from Iowa State, PhD from Ohio State. Then taught for a couple of years at Ohio University. It's another Ohio University. 2007, I returned to China to take my current position as chair professor, director. I put a picture of the journal here. It's called International Journal of Business Anthropology. I took that position because I pretty much want to introduce works by non-Western anthropologists to European, to English-speaking countries, because I think we are not actually in English-speaking language countries, we are not really represented. So this is one of the jobs I'm trying to promote. So this is how when Suman invited me to give a lecture on this Chinese anthropology, I think it's kind of a great idea. So we would really would let the West know what Asian anthropologists have done. Okay, now this is kind of introduction. Now let's move to next slide. Next section. I'm going to focus on the history of anthropology in China. We all know, anthropology studied in the West, specifically as an academic discipline in Great Britain. But in China, anthropology was first introduced at the beginning of the 20th century, that is last century. Basically, it's along with other Western social sciences, such as sociology, or Western ideas, such as Marxism. So this is beginning of 20th century at that time. It's kind of connected with Chinese history. We know at that time, China was kind of you may say backward, was kind of we cannot say control, but kind of heavily influenced by the Western powers. So basically, anthropology came to China, we say through 3 channels. First one, Chinese scholars who wanted to study anthropology in the West. So at the beginning of 21st century, Chinese government at that time pretty much realized China was far behind the Western powers. So they sent some young people to the West to study science and technology, and also some social sciences. So this is how we send some scholars to study anthropology in the West. The second channel is about anthropology works translated into Chinese, especially from Japan. You know, Japan, China, some words anyway they use together. So this is the second channel, how anthropology was introduced into China at the beginning of last century. The third one, some foreign anthropologists who came to teach and to do field work in China. From one source, I read like a Radcliffe Brown came to Shanghai and to give some lectures, and some Russian anthropologists teach at some universities in China. So this is basically at the beginning of last century, how anthropology started in China. Next slide. Was different from the Western anthropology. We know Western anthropology, especially in USA and especially in Great Britain, began as a scientific discipline by studying tribal people in other countries. We know anthropology studied in Britain because at that time Britain had a lot of colonies. They wanted to learn how to control those colonies. Anyway, but it also different from that. Most Chinese anthropologists at that time, at the beginning, so focused their research on the Han Chinese society. You know, in China, the majority of Chinese we call Han Chinese. It accounts about 90% of the whole population. So minority or ethnic people only account about 10%. So at the beginning, the Chinese anthropology focused their research on the Han Chinese societies, except a few Chinese anthropologists who studied Chinese ethnic minorities at the very beginning of the discipline in China. This is kind of related with Chinese intellectual tradition. In Chinese intellectual tradition, when the country is in trouble or the country was in a mess, intellectuals should study the problems, try to find solution to the problems. So this is why at the beginning of last century, the whole country, the whole China was kind of in trouble. So anthropology to try to find out the problems, try to provide solutions. This is two examples. The first one is Fei Xiaotong. I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. The second one is about Lin Yaohua. These two are pretty important anthropologists in the history of Chinese anthropology. Fei, a little bit more about Fei. Next slide. Fei Xiaotong, in 1935. So at the beginning, he studied one of the ethnic groups in China. So 1935, he just got married, and he, together with the newly married bride, they went to mountains in southern part of China to study Yao people. Unfortunately, they lost the way one night. They lost the way in the mountains, and he was kind of trapped by like a tiger or the tiger trunk, whatever. Anyway, the hunters use that to get tigers, but he himself stepped in and broke his leg. And his wife, in order to save him, his wife tried to look for help, and he accidentally fell off the cliff and died. So she died. So this is kind of tragedy for this guy. Physically, Fei Xiaotong, leg broke. Mentally, he lost his newly wife, and so he returned to his hometown in southern part of China in the village to recover. So he's, like many anthropologists, there's kind of a genius. So as he tried to recover physically, mentally, he studied the peasant's life in that village. So that's 35. So in 1936, and he went to England to London School of Economics to study under Mrinalini. We all know Mrinalini. So this was 1936. So in 1938, he got his PhD, pretty short period of time, two years. And his dissertation was published in 1939. So you can see under the title, Peasant Life in China. And his mentor, Mrinalini, wrote a preface for his book. You can see, they say, Mrinalini talk about, so not a small, insignificant tribe, but about the greatest nation in the world, not written by an outsider looking for exotic impression, but by a lady among the natives. Mrinalini even wrote, his book is a landmark in the development of anthropological field and theory. So think about 1930s, when a lot of anthropologists still study tribal people. So this guy studied not tribal people, but Han Chinese. Okay, you can see his book was later translated into Chinese called Jiangchun Jinji. This picture. What is important for this guy? In his whole life, later, like in 1940s, 50s, even in 67, before he died, he visited this village over 20 times. So it's kind of a continuous study on this village. This is really kind of unique in anthropology. Focus on one community, small village, for all his life. So you can, if you are interested in this part of China or in peasant's life in China, he must read his works. Okay, so this is about early 2000 to talk about 1940. So in 1949, Chinese Communist Party, CCP, came to power in mainland China. Okay, so power changed. Some Chinese anthropologists moved to Taiwan or overseas, but the majority stayed in China. So they intended to contribute their part to the building of a new China. So you can see that's many Chinese, the anthropologists, most of anthropology at that time kind of welcomed the change because the ruling party at that time really kind of corrupt. There's some examples here about, the first typical example is about C.K. Young. He moved to USA. C.K. Young, he got his PhD in University of Michigan. So he was educated in USA. So he later moved to USA. And he became kind of a leading anthropologist studying religion, especially Chinese religion. And another example is another picture about another guy called Lin Chunsen. This is a black and white picture, but he's a typical example who moved to Taiwan. He moved to Taiwan, and he's kind of a leading anthropologist in Taiwan. He took a lead in studying ethnic groups in Taiwan and ethnic groups in those islands in southern Pacific Oceans. So you can say, when CCP came to power, this is what happened to some anthropologists, or to some Chinese anthropologists. Next slides. Now, the CCP at the beginning, in the 1950s, Chinese Communist Party pretty much followed Soviet Union model, now we call Russia. This is the Soviet Union model. So they follow that. They pretty much accept a lot of things from Soviet Union. So they pretty much regard anthropology and sociology as a bourgeoisie disciplines in capitalist countries, even as obstacles to the socialist construction. causing damage to the new society. This is pretty much what happened in US in Soviet Union at that time. So anthropology and sociology kind of wrapped out from the universities in 1952. So they were moved out of the universities. So anthropology as an academic discipline was replaced at that time by ethnology. This is kind of a Russian style. Russian also ethnology became kind of a dominant. Next slide. We say this is 1952. There's some lucky anthropologists. I mentioned about Fei Xiaotong. I mentioned about Lin Yaohua. Those lucky ones. They were assigned by the government to study Chinese ethnic minorities by using theories, approaches from Soviet Union, Leninist, Marxist, Leninist, Stalinist approaches. Talking about class, talking about all those kind of Marxism ideas. Some other ones had to take lead jobs outside anthropology. I gave you the example here. One of this black and white picture. So this is the second person, the Anzai. This guy, well educated in anthropology. He was educated in Peking University, Beijing University, but later he went to USA to study. He studied at, I think, at Yale University. And he did some field work in USA too to study Indian tribes. So, but later he returned to China in the 1940s. But as a change, he had to teach English at university in Chengdu in China. So we talk about some other, like Francis Sikiyan, Francis Xi, moved to USA. So after CCP came to power, they moved later. Francis Xi is kind of important in anthropology, not just in China, in USA too. He kind of leading person in psychological anthropology. Now let's move to the next slide. So from 1949 all the way to 1972, China was virtually closed, basically closed to Western anthropologists. So this is in this pretty much like a 20 years. So I'll talk about later what Chinese anthropologists do during this period of time. As universities close anthropology disciplines. But those anthropologists interested in Chinese study, had to either to do field work in Taiwan, Hong Kong, overseas Chinese communities. Or like one of the very important British anthropology who study in China, or who study Chinese society is Maurice Friedman. He had to study or had to do his fieldwork in Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, okay, in 1950s and 60s. So we'll talk about overseas Chinese community, or even just sitting in an armchair reading archives, or Maurice interviewing the dead. This is not my language. This is Maurice Friedman language, interviewing the dead, which means you have to just read from the books, from the archives, or interview refugees in Hong Kong or United States. So only a very few lucky ones, such as William Geddes, Australian anthropologist, or granted permission to visit some showcase communities in China. So basically, that's just kind of showcase to the West. It's kind of organized by the government. Okay, then next slide. In 1978, China changed again. So China opened up at that time, opened up its door to the West, or China started its what they call reform and open up policy. So it's now open up again, talk about reform, talk about others, new ideas. So the first anthropology department was re-established in Sinyasan University. So this is the first one re-established in 1981, pretty much like 2 or 3 years after the opening up. Also, the first national symposium on anthropology was held at Xiamen University in 1981, and Chinese Anthropological Society was established at this first conference. So that's 1981. So all these, the reestablishment of a department and this Anthropological Society and conference, all this marked the revival of anthropology as academic discipline in China. This is kind of a 1981. Let's move to the next slide. 81. So with this open door policy also provided a chance for Western anthropologists to conduct fieldwork in China. So these started to come in large numbers in the middle of 1980s. So those Western anthropologists again came to China to do fieldwork. So the end of 1980s and very early 1990s, they started to publish their books and papers about China. They saw. I'll give 2 examples. The first example is about Chen village. This is a book by Anita Chang, Richard Madison, Jonathan Angers, published in 1984. Second example I gave you is about Hong Su-min's book, Spiral Road, Change in the Chinese Village Through the Eyes of a Communist Party Leader. I'll talk a little bit more about this book because Hong Su-min is my advisor at Iowa State when I was doing my MA study. So he's American Chinese, but he was educated at University of Michigan for his PhD. Anyway, this Spiral, I think he was one of the first anthropologists who was allowed to conduct fieldwork in China. So in 1980s, when he was doing, he worked 1 year actually, 1 year at Xiamen University, and he did fieldwork in a village close by. So published his book. This book in USA, when I was studying USA, his book became one of the books you have to read if you want to understand modern China. So next slide. So you can say it's an open door policy, anthropology as a discipline kind of re-established. You can see you can imagine at that time. China was facing some new situations, new problems. So this became kind of a topic for anthropology. We say in 1980, even in the whole 1980s, new problems and new situations that appeared in the minority areas, in the areas where ethnic people live, but in the course of so-called modernization, and even about Han Chinese society and rural China. So rural China, we talk about rural China, we talk about ethnic areas. These areas have gradually dominated Chinese anthropological research because you can clearly see a lot of changes came up. A lot of changes happened, especially in those rural areas. On the other hand, the tradition of studying ethnic minority cultures and producing descriptive accounts of their rituals, social organizations, religions, This still continued under the discipline of ethnology. So you can see that anthropology studying some issues, problems. Ethnologists, they still continue their traditional way of study. This is the 1980s. What is interesting or what is amazing in this period of time is we talk about revisiting or investigating villages in China. This is the next slide. Talking about 1980s in anthropology field in China, talk about revisiting, reinvestigating some villages in China. It's kind of comparative studies. This is kind of a feature of 1980s in Chinese anthropology. I'll give you some examples. When I mentioned about Xiaotong as peasant life in China, that's Jiangchun in one of the provinces, Jiangsu province. So he did his, when he was trying to recover from his physical damage, mental damage, in 1935. So he, did some study of that village. But later in the 1980s, 1990s, he took some students to revisit that village a lot of times. This is one of the typical examples I talked about before. Another one is about Martin Yang. He studied one of the village in Shandong province in 1940s. Another American anthropologist, Loma Darman, came to revisit or restudy in 1980s. Remember Lin Yaohua, his study of families in the Fujian province. His student, Zhuang Kongshao, in 1980s, re-study or re-investigate. Zhuang Kongshao, another kind of interesting example is about Phoenix village in Guangdong province. It was studied by Daniel Harrison Cobb in the 1920s, really early. Chinese anthropologist Zhou Daming restudied or revisit that village in 1990s. And among all those, Zhuang Kongshao and Zhou Daming are still two leading anthropologists in China. You can see that in those 80s, early 90s, they were kind of at the very beginning of their career as anthropologists. Now they've become leading anthropologists in China. So let's move to another next slide. You can see in the 1990s and 2000s, so I used 10 years. So the People's Republic of China, which was Mainland China, rather than Taiwan, Hong Kong, has become the fieldwork site of anthropology who start China. And also an increasing number of Chinese students who have earned master's or doctoral degree in anthropology, either in USA or in Great Britain, returned China, returned to an academic career in China. Well, I am one of the examples. I came back to China, mentioned at the beginning, 2007, so this period of time. So a lot of leading anthropologists here, let's see, in their late 50s, early 60s, I mean their age, late 50s, early 60s, kind of returned at this period of time from overseas. So they integrate Chinese anthropology into world anthropology. So this is talk about 90s. 80s, I mentioned about a lot of Western anthropologists came to do fieldwork in China and published works. Now 90s, so some in the West trained anthropology returned. Here is another examples. So in July 2009, the 16th Congress of International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences, the IUAES, in anthropology, we all know this because in 2023, India is going to host one of this kind of a congress. So this congress, 16th of this congress was held at Yunnan University of China. So this kind of clearly shows this integration of Chinese anthropology and the West anthropology. With at this congress, about 5,000 scholars and students from 116 countries and regions attended this conference. So Chinese and some Chinese scholars later, and after this congress, some Chinese scholars predicted that this congress would be a landmark in the course of development of Chinese anthropology. It surely is, because it's a big impact on Chinese anthropology. Think about these 5,000 scholars. They organized almost like 300 panels. Those panels pretty much cover all the areas of anthropological studies. So you can see a lot of new theories, new approaches, new way of study kind of introduced into China at this congress. Next slide. Another important impact of this congress is China, in order to host this congress, Chinese government organized this kind of a China Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences. So they set up this kind of an office to prepare for this congress. So this office was set up in March 2007. Then later, after the congress, this office was not stopped or was not dismantled. It still continued to exist and continue to develop. So now this congress has been developed into kind of a nationwide non-profit social organization. So they cooperate a lot of institutions, academic groups, and individuals. This has become one of the largest anthropology group or anthropology society in China. So now it now has like over 30, I think it's 39 special committees or sections. So they represent different, branches or areas in anthropology. They're pretty much like the American Anthropological Association. We know, have a lot of sections. They have almost like 40 sections. So they also hold its annual meeting at different universities across China each year. So with the programs set up by various committees or interest groups. We know AAA, we all know AAA, American Anthropology Association. Each year, the annual meeting will attract anthropologists all over the world. But this Chinese, CUAES, attract only Chinese anthropologists in China. But each year, each of their annual meeting, almost 500 to 600 anthropologists will attend. So the last one, last year's their annual meeting was held at Inner Mongolia Normal University, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. So still held their annual meeting. There's next slide. This is a picture about, you can see the picture about their annual meeting. You can see those guys who sit there wear masks. So there's their website, and here you can see from their website how many committees or sections they have. Pretty much 39, I think. So this became kind of one of the most influential anthropological society in China. So apart from this CUAES, there are two more national associations engaged in anthropological and ethnological researches. The first one is Chinese Anthropological Society, founded in 1981 in Xiamen University. The second one is Association of Chinese Ethnology, founded in 1980 in Beijing. So there are still another two at national level, international kind of level. These two associations, they both hold annual meetings with themes that show their research interest. From the picture that at the corner, it's last year's annual meeting of Chinese Anthropological Society. It's about anthropology of disease and anthropology and applications of anthropology. You can see kind of related to this pandemic. So this is the three associations at national level. These two also important. So besides the three associations at the national level, there are some regional or folk or non-governmental associations in anthropology or ethnology. The most outstanding one is Association for Ethnic Studies in Southwest China. This was founded in 1981 in Kunming. I live in Kunming, so I'm one of the member of this association. So this association now has about 1,000 individual members and also 45 group members. We talk group members pretty much like a university in 12 provinces. Another association, another one is the Advanced Forum of Anthropology. This is the folk one. This is not non-governmental folk one. They don't have a specific fundings from the government. So this is Advanced Forum of Anthropology. It's a non-governmental agency. Was set up to promote anthropology in China in 2000 by 22 institutions from China, mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So they set up this Advanced Forum of Anthropology. So each year they will have their meeting. I think I host one of the forums. This year in late August, in late October, this forum will be held at Fujian, one of the provinces along the coast. Those two pictures show their annual conference, the annual meeting. And let's move to the next slide. Now I'll move to, you can just say this is pretty much give you some kind of idea of how anthropology developed in China from early 20th century all the way to to present. Because I use time to show you how it's developed. Now I'm going to move to my next section. So that will be next slide. I'll talk about current situation of Chinese anthropology. So from history to current, then I'll talk about the future. Actually, I mentioned about three. At the national level, there are three associations. The existence of the three associations at the national level pretty much reveal dilemma of Chinese anthropology today. We know in USA there is only one, like Americans, one association, the AAA, American Anthropological Association. That's a big one, so a national one. But China have three. These three you can see the conflicts between anthropology and ethnology. But this conflicts can be traced back all the way to 1950s. I mentioned about before, in 1950s, anthropology was eliminated from university and ethnology was set up. When the government followed US model, Soviet model. Next slide. Next slide. We can see this is what I mentioned about what I told you a little bit more about what anthropologists did or what they did in the 50s all the way to 70s in those horrible years. They say from 50s to all the way to 1970s, this anthropology disappeared from the Chinese academic world. But on the contrary, ethnology experienced great development. So anthropology kind of suppressed by government, ethnology developed. As a hierarchy of institutes of minority studies, both at national and provincial level, was set up by the government. So from central government all the way to the local government. Then, anthropologists, including ethnologists in those years, 50s, 60s, were pressed by the government to join one giant project of identification and classification of ethnic minorities. So 50s, basically this is in the 50s, Chinese government started the project to identify all the ethnic groups in China. This is different from India. So in Chinese government, at the beginning, they identified like over 400. Then later from those 400 all the way to 56. Now plus the Han Chinese and 57. So ethnic groups in China classified by the government, or identified by the government and recognized by the government. So those years, 50s, 60s, basically a lot of anthropologists doing this job. And first identify and then, conduct investigations of the social history of those ethnic minorities. And also finally to study the social formation of those people. We know some of those ethnic groups in China, especially in my province, in Yunnan province, they didn't have language. So they didn't have a written language. They have a spoken language. So didn't have a written language. So, the history can pass from generation to generation by, not by text, but by words. So this is kind of a time, 60s, 70s, a lot of anthropologists trying to do this work. So a lot of, you can say 60s, 70s, 80s, some of the results of their investigation was published. It's about these ethnic groups in China. Then let's move to think about end of 1970s. Anthropology is gradually revived, restored as a discipline at universities in China. And ethnology has, this is kind of a change for ethnology too, has stepped out its traditional field of study on ethnic minorities. I mean, today, ethnology in China, they also study Han Chinese, majority of Chinese. The Han Chinese is also part of a, you can say part of a group. But there have not been ethnology, these two have not been integrated into one discipline. Okay. In the 1990s, there were heated debates in China about whether there should be one or should be two. So heated debate about status of anthropology in China. However, to today, the status of anthropology in China still remains, university still remains marginal. I use marginal. Why? I'll show you next slide. Because in the latest discipline list issued by the Ministry of Education of China, this 2016. So anthropology is not an independent discipline. It is put at a second level discipline. It's not first level, second level. You can say under sociology, there is a social anthropology. So part of anthropology is put under sociology. Then the ethnology is still first level discipline. I mean, still in this government official list, ethnology is first level, anthropology second level. So cultural anthropology and folklore put under ethnology. This is why I say anthropology, you don't see anthropology as a first level. So this is a big, huge difference. This level, this government classification kind of a huge impact because it's related to majors at universities and also related to government funds to those disciplines. You can see ethnology should receive much more funding from government than anthropology. So, so still debate going on even today whether we should be one integrated discipline. I mean, there's two, anthropology, ethnology, whether they should be integrated or whether there should be two separate first level disciplines, which means to promote anthropology as a kind of a sister discipline with ethnology. I myself kind of suggest the first one. I mean, support the first one. I support like one integrated discipline. So I think last year, some anthropologists, including myself, we wrote some articles, published in newspapers, tried to promote anthropology as the first discipline. But despite all the difficulties, you can see anthropology has encountered since 1980s. So Chinese anthropology still developed substantially. I'll give you some numbers. You can say in 1981, only one university in China, that's Sun Yat-sen University, offered doctoral and MA degrees in anthropology. 81, just one. By 2020, last year, 16 universities in China enroll PhD students in anthropology, and 45 universities, enroll MA students. From one jump to, you can see the numbers. And even most major universities in China now provide anthropology courses to undergraduate students. And also the number of anthropological research institutes has also increased. You can see from 81 to today, it's kind of developed substantially. But not as USA. We know USA, as long as you want any important universities in USA, or even the first level or second level university in USA have anthropology departments. I think close to 1,000. I don't know about the Indian case, but in China, say by last year, this is the number, 16 universities have PhD program, like 45 universities have MA programs. So top 5, here, next slide. Next slide give you the top 5 universities in China with well-established anthropology programs. I put number 1 as Sun Yat-sen University, number 2 as Xiamen University. These two took the lead in reviving anthropology in China. Next one is Beijing University, or we call Peking University. We know Peking University is one of the leading universities in China. Now they have anthropology, but they call anthropology sociology, put these two together. Number 4 is Yunnan University, where I work and study, but it's a different university. My university is Yunnan University of Finance and Economics. This is Yunnan University. Number 5 is Minzu University of China, that's in Beijing. You can see some in the southern part of China, some in the northern part of China. Kind of to represent some say 2 schools, anthropology schools in China. Well, some followed USA's style, 4 disciplines in anthropology, with cultural, physical, linguistic, archaeology. Like Sun Yat-sen University pretty much follow that. Some follow European style. Okay, like Peking University, kind of European British style. Next slide. So you can see the rise of anthropology in China from the 1 to 40. So kind of rise of Chinese anthropology is related to the gradual rise of China as a global power. Since China adopting reform, open door policies in the early 1980s. So this policy has caused tremendous social cultural changes, both in Han and ethnic minority societies. Remember Han, majority of Chinese. So you can say globalization, transnationalism, and cosmopolitanism. So that occurred in the West before, now kind of shaping Chinese society. So since Chinese reform started, officially started in 1978, but in early 1980s, gradually being practiced. You can, this picture, this next slide shows you. So new types of people, the changes, China, after this open door policy. So new types of people, new ways of life, always new forms of social organization have emerged in China. So as this big change, newly emerging issues and the problems have haunted the Chinese government. So new issues, new problems. Chinese government and business people, both in China and outside China too. We know, this globalization process, China became kind of a manufacturer of the world. So, but the Chinese merchants also met a lot of problems overseas. So all this provides opportunities and challenges to Chinese anthropology, because a lot of new issues, new problems, new ways of having new people. I showed the picture is called modern people. Next slide. Here is a quote from a Dutch anthropologist who's, he published the paper called Anthropology, China and Chinese Century. So this is a quote from his article. He said, new realities of life in China have fundamentally reshaped modern Chinese anthropology. This is important. See that how Chinese anthropology changed from traditional to present study. It is no longer dominated by one clear paradigm or group of dominant scholars. Remember, I mentioned Tong, Lin Yaohua, this took dominant. Anthropological fieldwork has become more issue-driven, city-based, not rural area, city-based, and multi-sided than before. Anthropological research in China is now much more specialized in a particular aspect of Chinese society. This is what this Dutch anthropologist, he noticed what happened in Chinese anthropology. So he published his article in 2014. Here is my next slide, is my comment. As I compare Chinese anthropology with American anthropology. So as compare with American anthropology, Chinese anthropology today shares a similar large scope of research topics. So research topics not really broad, including economics, social organization, religion, ethnicity, migration, urbanization, poverty and development, globalization, ecology, medicine, genetics, war and disaster, technology and new media, etc. So you can just say Chinese anthropology, the research areas kind of broad, became kind of really broad, but also differ from American anthropology in geographic areas of study. Because the majority of Chinese anthropologists today still focus their studies on their own people inside China, including ethnic peoples inside China. We know American anthropologists pretty much study the worldwide, but it's here you can see the majority of Chinese anthropologists still study Chinese inside, including me. I do a lot of study inside China. But next slide. But this might this might change in the future because Chinese economic power continues to grow, and Chinese government now, it's one belt, one road globalization strategy. If this has been fully practiced, today some Chinese anthropologists have proposed that Chinese anthropology in the future should focus on three areas. There's three areas. The first area is the anthropology of rural Han Chinese. You remember, China used to be a rural country. Most of Chinese live in the rural areas, but today it's like a half and half. It's changed, but still some rural areas. So this is the first one. Second one's ethnology of ethnic people. So to study ethnic people. Third one is the overseas ethnography. So overseas studies kind of will become one of the areas. So the last part of our presentation, we took about 1 hour. Let's move to this part about the future of Chinese anthropology. Basically, with one question. Talk about future of one anthropology in one country should be kind of connected with the world anthropology. We say, what can Chinese anthropology contribute to the world anthropology in general? This is my question. We know since the revival of Chinese anthropology at some Chinese universities in early 1980s, Chinese anthropology has made remarkable achievements in some traditional areas, traditional anthropological study areas, such as kinship systems, religion and ritual, comparative politics, economic cultures. Those are traditional areas. Okay, so there have been some remarkable contributions. A lot of books, articles published about Han Chinese, about ethnic groups in China in those areas. So you can do comparative studies. Let's move to next slide. Next slide. I use two Western anthropologists, how they look at Chinese anthropology. The first one is about Stephen Howell. Stephen Howell is a professor from University of Washington. He has really big influence in Chinese anthropology because I think he had at least about 30 PhD students from China. So you can see how many, some of them are now took important positions in China, in Chinese universities in China. So this guy summarized what Chinese anthropology contributed to the anthropology in general. He wrote a published an article in 2001. So pretty much summarized the anthropologist's works in 1990s. This is what it is. So from most traditional research, okay, Chinese anthropology made contributions in the anthropological study of communities. We say community studies, both rural, urban, or between rural and urban. So also made contributions to the study of individual lives. What he mean by gender, sexuality, family, marriage, childhood education, consumption, and layering in those areas. This is Chinese anthropology made contributions too. And also, last one I mentioned about of the relation and its constituent ethnic and regional parts. So study of the relation, okay. So this is what he summarized in 2001. What Chinese anthropology has contributed to the world anthropology. Another anthropologist I mentioned about this Dutch anthropology, this PK. In 2014, he mentioned a little bit more. He said contributions to the study of new social order. In 2014, when the Chinese reform or Chinese open door policies has led to rapid change in China. I might talk about that before. So he talk about new social order. They talk about contribution to living in a risk society. risk society, because in China we mentioned about the food safety problems. So here, this is what is a risk societies. Contribution to the politics of government, to the study of population, government, and science, to the study of Chinese population control policies. Well, anyway, to the study of class, consumption, and belonging, to the study of old and new diversities. This is what he added a few more contributions of Chinese anthropology to the world anthropology. The old and new diversities, kind of interesting. For old one, we talk about Chen. We know China can be unified in language. We use the same written language, okay? But somehow we're kind of diversified in dialects. So this is what he mentioned. This is the old one. We talk about old one. We have some great tradition, but it's kind of unified. But we have some little traditions, kind of diversified. But this is old diversities. But I mentioned about new diversities. Okay, in 2015, a Chinese anthropology, Zhao Xudong is Zhao, he added, so Chinese anthropology made contributions to the study of social transformation and cultural transformation. Social transformation, and we know after China's reform, a lot of transformation going on, especially political, economical, social organizations. So this is what I mean, social transformations. From what do we call, if you look at economy, from what do we call planned economy, almost to the market economy, so kind of transformations. With this transformation, cultural change definitely will occur. So I did this couple of years. I add another two is what I added. So well, China will make contributions to the set of countries, the cultures along the Belt and Road. So basically, we'll provide some ethnography for those countries, cultures. And another one I call about rural vitalization. This is what Chinese government now focus on at the present or in the future. They talk about the rural vitalization, basically to develop rural areas, to make people stay in the rural areas instead of moving to the cities. So, well, I think probably Chinese anthropology can do some contributions to. So national identity building, that's another one. Let's move to next slide. This is still next slide. Is quote from that Picker, that's Dutch anthropology. This is direct quote you can see from his article. As the rise of China as a global power has provided a unique opportunity to Chinese anthropology to make a lasting contribution to the world anthropology by finding new ways of thinking and writing about society that is much more than just another culture. Basically, I understand what he means from tribal society to complex society in China. So this is kind of a new way of writing. By bearing ethnographic witness to a global process, domination, expansion, exploitation, talk about expansion, China, exploitation, on the vantage point of a newly emerging center, and by looking beyond China's border to make ethnographically informed comparisons with other civilizations. This is what he summarized, what Chinese anthropology can do to the world anthropology. Now, next slide. You can see, as I say, I mentioned about before, China's anthropology is still, its status is still marginal. But the status of anthropology in China might not be easily solved right now, because this Ministry of Education now has launched a new strategy to build world first-rate universities and the world first-rate disciplines in China. First-rate discipline, which puts anthropology as a potential competitor with ethnology for state funding and other resources. I mentioned about before, ethnology is the first level discipline, anthropology, part of anthropology, second level. You can see. So these two, the conflicting these two will continue. So because of that, some universities, I mentioned about next slide, Sun University, though traditionally, this university to American-style full-field anthropology, but recently set up or restored their programs in ethnology. So you can see, I have no choice to get more funds from governments that they restore their programs in ethnology, not just for fields of anthropology. So, well, you can see Chinese anthropology will certainly have a bright future, but there is a long way to go to realize what Maurice Freedom predicted back in 1962, a Chinese face of anthropology in the world. So you can see this is kind of I think this is a kind of my ending comments. I borrowed Maurice Freedman. The future is bright, but still there is a long way to go. I think that's kind of end my presentation. Thank you. Now it's kind of open for questions. I think I use a little bit more time.
Thank you very much, sir, for the interesting talk and enlightening us with your knowledge. Now we come to the discussion session. If anyone has any question, I'm sure sir would be pleased to answer them. Any questions, please?
Thank you, sir, for this interesting lecture. Sir, I get to know from your lecture only that you live in Kunming, and I got the opportunity to visit Kunming in 2009 during this 16th World Congress. And we also got the opportunity to visit one of the ethnic groups. I remember which group was it. Probably Yi people, maybe Yi people or Han people.
They have one to Yi area. That's it.
So which is the dominant group in Kunming? Dominant ethnic group?
Don't say dominant group. Dominant group is still Han in Kunming.
Han people.
Han Chinese. Yi is one of the largest ethnic group in Yunnan province.
Suchishmita, can you stop the slide presentation at the screen so that
It is stopped.
Okay.
But how did this background came?
I don't know. You have to stop properly, I think. Anyway, you have stopped to share the screen?
Yes, I have stopped. Can you see now?
No. Okay, no. Yes, you can see, but in the screen, some of these things, the background is coming. I think from your laptop.
No, it is not in my laptop. Change the scene. I think we have to change the scene. Someone has to change the scene.
I can see small faces in the background.
So, none.
Well, we can hear each other. This is great. So you can just, this Chinese. I don't know about how.
Anyway, Sushmita, you can proceed. You can proceed to discuss. No problem.
I am trying to change the scene from my end. I don't know whether it is applicable or not.
Actually, it is coming a different background in slide background.
But I can't change it. I don't know. Yes.
It looks nice. That signifies that we are going to China.
Yes, and probably we are sitting in a meeting room.
No, in a flight. In a flight.
Oh, you are flying. Yes.
For that Congress.
I can change, but I cannot omit this. I don't know how.
Okay. Okay, you can carry it. You can carry it.
This is better.
No
Okay,
problem.
okay.
You can carry on.
Okay. So I was talking about Han people, and I got this information from Google only that Han people are also called Ho people. This is very interesting because in India there is a community, ethnic group, who are called Ho people. So I don't know whether there is any relation between this Indian group and the Chinese Han people. What is their origin, sir? Could you throw some light?
From about this Han people,
Yeah, yeah.
well, you know, if it's a Chinese civilization, this is kind of related to this to the style of this civilization. We talk about the Yellow River. Just between these rivers, Yellow River, Yangtze River. This is where Chinese civilization started. That's 3,000, 5,000 years ago. Anyway, so this is how those are the people start from there. As Han people start from there. About 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, one of the kingdom united the China. So the push that the unite Chinese language, unite Chinese currency. Okay, this one this guy. Then you can say from 2,000 years ago, the Han Chinese gradually expanded from to the north all the way, to the south, to the Southeast Asia, to the west. Himalaya mountains just cannot move. You just cannot move across. Han Chinese kind of specialized in rice farming. But during this process, in the past 2000, some Han Chinese moved to Central Asia. So they were called differently in Central Asia, in some countries in Central Asia. They're Han Chinese, but they believe in Muslim, Islamic. Okay, they believe in Islamic. So some moved to Tibet. From Tibet, probably moved to India. So they might have different.
I understand. Thank you, sir. And one
But
more question was coming to my mind that, yes, sir, can't hear you, sir.
There are some physical anthropologists in Fudan University, one of the really well-established university in China. Fudan physical anthropologists, they have a kind of a research lab. They try to use modern genetics approach. This is kind of a popular modern genetics approach to analyze how this Han Chinese, how they migrate.
Okay. So another question was, I was thinking that why is ethnology so popular in China? Is it because people are doing comparative works?
What is the problem in China?
Why ethnology is so popular in China? All the disciplines are regarding this thing.
I mentioned about in some country, anthropology, ethnology is kind of one discipline, especially in USA. Ethnology is part of cultural anthropology, right? But in German, ethnology is, or in Russian, German is kind of independent. Well, in Chinese case, I think what I mentioned about the division came from 1950s because of the government policy. Otherwise, China, well, anthropology from the West came to China from the West. So this ethnology came to China also from the West. So because the government support one and they suppress another one, so you have limited resources. Definitely, nobody wants to step down. Especially today, even though anthropologists try and promote anthropology, those ethnology want to stick to their status. They don't want anthropology. They don't want ethnology to be part of anthropology. They want anthropology to be part of ethnology. So this is just a lot of politics going on.
Thank you, sir. Shuman.
Yes, yes. That is a wonderful lecture we have heard from Chen. And one thing that is very good for us that we have selected the person from the different nations, the right person, right? I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think Dr. Ratna also agreed and Dr. Tharaka also agreed with me that it is very, very important because Professor Chan, it is not so easy to discuss the anthropology for the nation. Like you people is a supreme authority. So it is our pleasure that to hear you in the background of the anthropology of the nation, specifically from China. So we have heard a very, very wonderful lecture, and that is has opened our eyes that the struggles also there in China for anthropology specifically. So we are basically gathering the knowledge from the different nations, and we are trying to put some of the common things, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. You
already,
know,
already,
and
yes, already we have gone through the different nations' histories, but the common thing is that every nation, the anthropology, there is a strong histories and also the history of struggle. No, so the people like you and also the other anthropologists, they devoted much to revive the anthropology and get their positions. Now, my question is, some of the question in roaming in my mind. First is the Han Chinese population. You are telling that the majorities of this work of the ethnology and anthropology have been done on the Han Chinese population. So, whether this Han Chinese population's culture is differ regionally or there is a common thing, because China is a very big country.
yeah, it's a good question. So basically, if you remember, I mentioned about Fei Xiaotong, one of the leading anthropologists in China, and one of the anthropologists who has got the highest government job, the highest government position. He was, before he died, he was a vice chairperson or chairman of People's Congress of China. So it's kind of like the Congress in USA, there's a vice chairperson. It's kind of important guy. He had lots of students, and his students now pretty much in Chinese, the key positions in Chinese universities in anthropology. What he mentioned about is one of his theories mentioned about this, talk about what they will call unity within diversity. So what he mentioned about for the well, we want to say that unity refers to that makes one country, or makes what Chinese government now emphasizes Chinese nation or Chinese national community. Anyway, or Chinese culture. But this Chinese culture does not only refer to Han Chinese. This including all ethnic groups. So this is what this guy mentioned about unity within diversity. And this guy, Fei Xiaotong, he tried to also promote he's using his own language was the beauties of all groups. Which means all groups have their unique cultures, the beautiful way of life. So this work together to make Chinese culture. So this is what he mentioned about. But this is also the way how in anthropology, we all know how culture develops. This is all basically the way how culture develops. This dominant culture is Han Chinese, gradually, sooner, well, if you look at the whole world, it's like that. Now the Chinese wear their coats, their wear is from the West. The anthropology is from the West. So this whole globalization process, this is the same thing in China happens. This Han Chinese, the other Chinese group, ethnic groups will become part of this ethnic, they will borrow, they will, we talk about Yi people. She mentioned about in some Yi communities I went to, some of the young people couldn't speak their language anymore. I talk with those young people, I say, hey, my parents couldn't speak their dialogue. So only the grandpa probably could speak. So you can just say within this 40 or 50 years. some language disappeared, pretty much like Poland disappear, or some in China. You know, with the language disappear, also the culture disappear too. So this is pretty much kind of a put anthropology. You have to try to record, at least try to collect all those cultures that's going to disappear.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. So the important thing is that I saw that the Han Chinese populations, they are all distributed overseas, and you all also emphasize the overseas ethnography. So is there any studies yet have been done to study the Han Chinese population in different Southeast Asian countries?
There is actually there are two. Well, I was division. Well, kind of, let's say this way. I mentioned the Minju University of China, right? They set up a research center. They call the Center of Overseas Studies. So this is one center. They sent their students, PhD students, basically, to Central Asia, to Russia, to some countries. Okay. Then in Peking University, one of the top universities in China, their Institute of Anthropology, and one of the professors, it's kind of a friend of mine, also sent his students to developed countries like Europe, like USA, like even also included Africa. So, and in Yunnan University, mentioned about Yunnan University tried to have their own areas of overseas studies. They send their students to Southeast Asia, to India, to I think Sri Lanka. They have different centers: Sri Lanka, India, and Bangladesh, Pakistan. So this is Yunnan University. So they got some fundings from the government to try to do that. So there's different universities. Now it's kind of division of work. In like Middle East, like Nishan University, they have their anthropology studies in Middle East. So you can just now pretty much a lot of overseas studies going on. But it's still basically at the ethnographic level.
Now, another thing is that I just wondering that what about the student perception for choosing this discipline in their early careers in China?
You mean the students' participation in these two disciplines,
yes.
Right? No, this is very harsh. Some of them, well, you may follow their professor's tradition. They call themselves ethnologists. There is a big debate actually in China in the mentioned by 1990s. It's pretty much like in USA, we know, like physical anthropology tried to split from other anthropology, and they had a pretty much heated debate. And you have to try to follow whether one side or another side. In China, same thing, 1990s. But there was a movement, or there is a movement towards to integrate these two. This is why that I mentioned about that the association with a large number of groups is they call themselves what they call themselves union of China's anthropology, ethnological research. So they try to put these two together. So well, there might be some development in this, put these two together in the future. But for the government, they now openly government, you can say Ministry of Education, you can see their policy, ethnology is their first choice.
Oh.
But if China want this globalization process of China going on, this is one belt, one road. This process, this policy is going on. Who knows if if the leader, our president, one day wrote a paper, say anthropology, then we'll develop.
Thank you. And another question, last question that is, This is my for enhancing my knowledge. I saw that there is a center for Zemen University International Center for Medical Anthropology. Where it is? Is it situated in China? Zemen University International Center for Medical Anthropology.
Oh, you mean where is the Center for Medical Anthropology?
Yeah, German University International Center for Medical Anthropology, and where it is situated? It's situated in International Center for Medical Anthropology, German University, Research Discovery Applicants, and they are the international interdisciplinary team of the researchers, scholars, and practitioners developed to conducting research from an integrated and holistic perspective to provide better solution in global health problems. So, headed by Director Benjamin K. Cohen, PhD International Director, and from China, Zhang Jiangqing. So, he's the professor and chair Department of Anthropology and Ethnology, Xiamen University. So, is this center located in, do you know, is this center located in Xiamen University or it is located in outside the China?
Actually, there are some institutions in China and try to do some cooperations with foreign universities, especially like medical anthropology. They used to have pretty close relationship with Harvard universities to study like to get the blood samples or those. There are some universities to study AIDS problems in China. Also, kind of collaborations with foreign universities. So I mentioned about one of the universities, Fudan University, that's in Shanghai, Fudan University.
I know.
It has pretty much the largest physical anthropology center in China, probably in East Asia too. They have one building, the whole building. They have a lot of new equipment bought from USA to do genetics studies. So, well, this is the case.
Thank you.
Let's mention one thing here. Thank you really for your hard work. I think this is very important to try to do studies, to try to do lectures on anthropology in different countries, Asian countries. We know anthropology, came to Asian countries. So my journal, at the International Journal of Business Anthropology, we try to do this same thing as you do. I think so far we published special issues like French anthropology. We call business anthropology, but it's kind of applied. French anthropology, part one special issue. Japanese business anthropology, Chinese business anthropology. So we try to do that. So if some of you want to write papers on the history of anthropology in your own countries, if there is no place to send, you send it to us. We'll publish it. Once it's been published, our journal also in a lot of universities across the world, it can be found in their libraries. It's like USA, a lot of libraries have online journals. It's there, so you can see a lot of readers. So you can have a lot of readers to know. So it's important. Well, since you have opened up this lecture series, it's really important to write them down. Write them down because write down you will let the Western anthropologists know. This is important. Okay, it's great work. Thank you.
Now, I think if there is any question, Dr. Ratna and anybody.
Sir, Shuman, I have just a very common question. Probably everyone will want to know regarding this. Sir, I would like to know what is the trend at present regarding anthropological field works or anthropological theoretical works are going on, because during this pandemic situation, people are unable to visit places. So what is the situation, anthropological situation in China right now?
Well, I think I mentioned about China needs anthropology. This is recently a lot of anthropologists wrote papers, papers for newspapers, articles for newspapers, tried to promote anthropology, because some problems, some uses, you just cannot use ethnology to deal with it. So especially when I mentioned about Han Chinese urban cities, all those, and oversee anthropology. So basically, you can see sooner or later, well, anthropology will play a role in China.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think Ms. Riba, you can proceed now. So we have just crossed 1.5 hours. So it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I would like to request Dr. Suman Chakravarti sir to present the vote of thanks.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
So
Ms.
let's try to keep in touch. You have my email, so we
Yes.
try to keep in touch, try to promote anthropology, or to let the West know how anthropology develops.
That is a common thing you have made, Matt. You have written your last mail that you have tried to promote the Asian anthropologists for their enriching the knowledge and also the contributing from the papers. So that is our motto. This is a common motto for us to promote the Asian anthropology at par the Western anthropology, so that they can grow and grow and grow in the coming time. So that is the main contribution. So thank you, Ms. Riba, for giving me the opportunity to give the vote of thanks. On behalf of the organizing committee, I acknowledge my sincere thanks to all the participants in our today's program. Though it is actually held through the Skype platform, we are very, very much new in Skype platform, though you have done a very good job. I give my really heartfelt vote of thanks to our invited speaker today, Professor Chen from China, who spent his busy schedule with us today. We had the opportunity to hear your thoughts, sir, and this actually encouraging us in our future events. We have actually you have done a great job to enlighten us our minds and show the comprehensive historical brief about the Chinese anthropology. Hope each of the participants, they enjoyed a lot for understanding the anthropology of the China, because this is a very, very rare question. It's very, very rare occasions for us, because we are very rarely connected with the Chinese populations, Chinese anthropologists, and that is the very unique things we have done today. And I congratulate all the participants, also the organizing committee, for giving us the opportunity to link the Professor Chen for his wonderful lecture. We remember him for our future, and hopefully we will continue to contact with him for the reviving the anthropology in Asian countries, because Professor Chen is a very, very, very honorable person and one of the supreme authority for the China from anthropology from China, and also have deep connections not only in Asian countries but also in European and American countries. If you have gone through the editorial board of the International Journal of Business Anthropology, you can get it, sir. I have conveyed your message to our one of the legend in Indian anthropology, that is Professor K.C. Malhotra, Kailash Chandra Malhotra. He is now 86 years old. Now, after going through your journal, he actually appreciated me that he did not know that this kind of journal is going on in business anthropology, because now in the age of 86, he is thinking about the corporate anthropology. So it is very, very fruitful journal for you, and we wish that your journal is going very far and also help the knowledge generation in the future. So from my text, for the vote of thanks, I congratulate all of you, and once again, thanks Professor Chen for accepting our invitation and delivered a wonderful and marvelous lecture for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I just stopped the recording, and after that we can share our knowledge. No problem.
Yeah, we're